A man sits down at a podium in Washington and speaks for maybe an hour. He doesn't pass a law. He doesn't print a single dollar in that room. And yet, by the time he stops talking, trillions of dollars have moved around the planet. That man is the chair of the Federal Reserve. And the strange part is that most people who watch markets every day couldn't really tell you what the Fed does or why anyone listens. So let's fix that. Here's the scale we're talking about. The Federal Reserve sits at the center of the US dollar, and the dollar is on roughly 88% of all foreign exchange trades in the world. So when the Fed moves the price of the dollar, it isn't just an American story, it is everyone's story. By the end of this, you'll understand what the Fed is actually trying to do, the one lever it really pulls, why a quarter of 1% can shake the world, and the strange violent crisis that created the whole thing in the first place. Let's get into it. To understand why the Fed exists, you have to go back to a time when America had no central bank at all, and watch what happened when the money simply ran out. It's October 1907. A reckless bet to corner a copper company's stock collapses, and the bank tied to it fails. Then fear does what fear does, it spreads. Depositors line up around the block demanding their cash all at once, and bank after bank simply runs dry. There was no central bank to step in and lend, so one man did it himself. The financier J.P. Morgan, by then in his 70s, locked the country's top bankers in his private library and refused to let them leave until they pooled their own money to stop the bleeding. The crash still wiped out nearly half the value of the stock market. And that was the terrifying lesson. A modern economy could not depend on one private banker happening to be rich enough and willing enough to save it. The country needed a permanent lender of last resort, an institution, not a man. So in 1913, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act, and the Fed was born. And here's the very American compromise baked into it. It isn't one bank, it's a system. A board in Washington overseeing 12 regional reserve banks, split between public and private control, so no single city and no single politician could own it. The design has a strange split personality on purpose. The Fed is meant to be independent from day-to-day politics, so it can make unpopular choices, but it's still accountable to the Congress that created it. As one former chair put it, it answers to the nation, but it doesn't take orders from the White House. So an institution was built, but built to do what exactly? Congress eventually gave the Fed a job description with just 2 lines on it. It's called the dual mandate, and it is genuinely just 2 goals. 1, maximum employment. Get as many people working as the economy can sustainably handle. 2, stable prices. Keep inflation low and predictable. Jobs and the value of your money, that's the whole job. And the Fed put an actual number on half of it. Its target for inflation is 2% a year, not 0, 2, because a little, steady inflation greases the economy and keeps it a safe distance from the far scarier trap of falling prices. 2% is the bullseye it's quietly aiming at in almost every decision. But here's the catch that makes the job so hard. These 2 goals fight each other. To crush inflation, you usually slow the economy down, which costs jobs. To protect jobs, you let the economy run hot, which can let inflation loose. The Fed is forever walking a tightrope between the 2. Think of it as a thermostat for the whole economy. When things run too hot, prices climbing too fast, the Fed cools it down. When things run too cold, people losing jobs, it warms it up. The entire art of the job is deciding which problem is more dangerous right now. Okay, so the Fed wants stable prices and full employment. The obvious question is how? With what tool? And the answer comes down to one surprisingly small lever. The Fed does not set the rate on your mortgage. It does not set your credit card rate directly. What it actually sets is one obscure number, the interest rate that banks charge each other to borrow cash overnight. It's called the federal funds rate. That sounds tiny and technical, but that overnight rate is the seed price of money for the whole system. Every other rate, it's mortgages, car loans, business loans, savings accounts, is built on top of it. Nudge the seed, and the whole forest moves. The decision is made 8 times a year by a committee called the FOMC, 19 officials, 12 of whom vote at any meeting. They study the data, argue, and announce a target. In recent years, that rate has swung from near 0, up past 5%, and back down, a huge range for one little number. To fight inflation, the Fed raises that rate. Borrowing gets expensive, people and companies spend less, the economy cools. To fight unemployment, it cuts the rate. Money gets cheap, borrowing and hiring pick up, the economy heats. Up to cool, down to warm. That's the core of it. But there's a catch that haunts every Fed chair. The lever works on a delay. A rate change can take a year or more to fully ripple through the economy. So the Fed is driving while mostly seeing out the back window, reacting to where the economy was, while steering for where it's going. Now, for most of its history, that one lever was enough. Then came 2008, and the Fed cut its rate all the way to 0, and the economy was still on fire, so it reached for something it had never really used before. Here's the problem. Once the rate is at 0, the Fed can't really cut it any further to stimulate the economy. It's out of road. So it opened a second, far more powerful toolbox, known as quantitative easing, or QE. Quantitative easing works like this. The Fed creates new money, digitally, and uses it to buy huge quantities of bonds, mostly government debt and mortgage bonds, in the open market. That pushes longer-term rates down and floods the system with cash even when the main rate is already at 0, and the scale is staggering. Going into 2008, the Fed's balance sheet, the pile of assets it holds, was under $1 trillion. After two crises, the financial one and then the pandemic, it peaked at nearly $9 trillion, bought with money that didn't exist before. And then there's the reverse, quantitative tightening, or QT. When the economy no longer needs support, the Fed runs the movie backwards. It lets those bonds mature and rolls money out of the system, slowly shrinking that giant balance sheet. QE pumps money in, QT drains it back out. Now, in fairness, this is genuinely controversial. Supporters credit QE with stopping the 2008 collapse from becoming a second Great Depression. Critics argue it inflated the price of stocks and housing and quietly widened the gap between people who own assets and people who don't. Both sides have a real point, which brings us back to where we started. Why does a quarter of 1 percentage point, a number so small it sounds like a rounding error, send shockwaves through every market on Earth? The first reason is reach. That overnight rate is the foundation under tens of trillions of dollars of loans, bonds, and contracts worldwide. So a quarter point change isn't applied once, it's multiplied across an almost unimaginable base. A tiny percentage of a gigantic number is still enormous. The second reason is how investors value everything. Wall Street prices an asset on its future cash flows, discounted by interest rates. When rates rise, those future profits are worth less today, so the value of stocks, especially fast-growing tech, mechanically falls. That's how one Fed sentence knocks trillions off the market in an afternoon. But the third reason is the deepest. Markets don't just react to what the Fed does, they react to what they think it'll do next. Half of a chair's power isn't the rate change at all. It's the words around it, the hints about the future, which is why every comma in a Fed statement gets dissected like scripture. A former Fed chair, Alan Greenspan, once joked about exactly this, about how careful he had to be, because the entire world was hanging on the precise shade of meaning in his every phrase. And because the dollar is the world's reserve currency, this doesn't stop at the US border. When the Fed raises rates, money rushes toward higher-yielding dollars from across the globe. Other currencies sink, import costs jump, and central banks thousands of miles away are forced to react. The Fed sneezes, and the world catches a cold. So the Fed is powerful, almost frighteningly so. But before you imagine it as some all-controlling wizard, it's worth being honest about what it can't do. The Fed controls the price of money. It does not control the actual economy. It can't make a company invent a great product. It can't fix a broken supply chain, end a war, or undo a government's spending. It can only make borrowing cheaper or dearer, and then hope. And it's haunted by one nightmare: getting the timing wrong. Tighten too late and inflation digs in and runs away. Tighten too hard, and you tip the country into recession. The space between those two mistakes, the so-called soft landing, is narrow, and the Fed is threading it half-blind. So next time you see that man sit down at the podium, you'll know what you're really watching. Not a politician passing a law, not a printer spitting out cash. You're watching someone steer the largest economy on Earth with one small lever, and a lot of carefully chosen words. If this finally made the Federal Reserve click for you, do me a favor and follow Market Minute. Next time I'll break down what actually happens to your money, your savings, your loans, your stocks, the moment the Fed cuts. I'll see you there.